How we doing, everybody? It's your guy Wardy here. It is Friday, October 24th, 2025, and our latest edition of getting into all the news and rumblings of Mets land throughout the course of the offseason. And folks, we have ourselves quite the discussion today. The headline should not be overly surprising to some of you. To others, it is most certainly surprising, and there's a question mark at the end because we have to figure out, is this actually true? Where exactly is this stemming from? And that is quite literally David Stearns potentially not having the appetite for a polar bear Pete Alonso reunion. We'll get into where this conversation initially stems from today. Ultimately, how true is it versus maybe not true is it? What is it going to happen with Pete Alonso this offseason, the odds of him returning versus not returning, as we're going to compare and contrast how things were a year ago as the Mets were in active negotiations with Alonso before he ultimately returned to now present day. Things are not the same as they were a calendar year ago, everybody, so we're going to break down all that in between, how much the Mets would be losing if should Pete Alonso be parted with this offseason, and how much they gain in a reunion and a whole lot more. All I ask is that you hit that like and subscribe on your way, and let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below, because I want to hear from each and every one of you, because if this is at all true, I want to know from you guys exactly how concerned are you from a fan point of view, and this is the way of thinking the Mets are going to have heading in the offseason, and secondly, how do you feel in a world where the Mets do not have Alonso return, and there is actually someone put in place of him that is not currently on the roster, meaning not a Ryan Clifford promotion, not a Mark Vientos transition at first, but something externally to replace the polar bear. Let me know it, and as always, everybody, and I'm not saying this as someone who wants Alonso gone. Let me make that abundantly clear. I'm saying that just for the reality that it may in fact happen, and we're going to break down all those factors right here, right now. But before we do, let's shout out our amazing sponsors that make every single show here happen, that being at SeatGeek, that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Simply head over there to SeatGeek and use my promo code WARDY10, that is WARDY10, because you're going to save 10% off your next ticket purchase, whether you're a Nets or a Knicks fan in the NBA right now, whether you're a Rangers and Islanders or a Devils fan anywhere else. And I'm sorry, you're kind of a schmuck, and I'm half joking as I say that, because we got to stay with these East Coast teams for the most part, even though I'm honestly kind of not talking all that great as someone who's a Steelers fan, even though I'm New York for everything else. I know doesn't make sense. Whether it's NFL, NBA, NHL, concerts, comedy shows, you name it, SeatGeek has you covered for everything there in the ticketing space. And link down below, 10% off your next ticket purchase. And shout out to Manta Sleep. Head over to mantasleep.com and use my promo code WARDY, W-A-R-D-Y, because you're going to get 10% off the best sleep masks in the game today, everybody. Well, first and foremost, everybody, let me start with the knee-jerk reaction, okay? David Stearns doesn't want Pete Alonso back. Now, as we know, there's a lot of reasons as to why that would be in the case of David Stearns. The same way there's a multitude of reasons as to how asinine even the thought of Pete Alonso not being in a Mets uniform for the foreseeable future is. I see both sides of the coin here, and whether it's a devil on the shoulder or angel on the other, or just being rational and realistic versus maybe being a bit more homer and biased on your homegrown talent, whatever the case may be, I completely understand both lanes here. And that is why I'm not going into this with like a, oh my God, how dare this be the case in the manner of David Stearns. But there's a massive asterisk with that, because I will most certainly react in that manner, depending on exactly how Alonso would be parted with by this Mets team when looking at contract details, how negotiations went, interest, lack thereof, in a reunion, and all that kind of fun stuff in between. Now, let's get into where this conversation initially stems from today, because this is courtesy of Joel Sherman of the New York Post that you guys are going to see right here, right now, as Joel just basically says verbatim what is on his mind. But in case you guys don't know, Joel Sherman, John Heyman are two of the most connected people that you will see in the New York baseball space when looking at all things news and rumblings. And as someone who's an active contributor with the New York Post too, I can tell you that they most certainly are in on the know. That's why they, of course, get interviews with guys like Alonzo, with Stearns, like Cohen on their podcast without a problem. And they obviously are talking to plenty of people in the industry constantly, including people very close, I'm sure, to a degree, of one Stearns, get as much information as they possibly can, which has led Joel Sherman to the following analysis. Listen up, everybody.
I think Alonso, without the qualifying offer and off of the good platform, and with teams needing offense the way they do, he's clearly going to opt out of the $24 million he's owed in 2026, and he's going to go into a marketplace that I think is going to treat him better than it was treated last year. I think left to his own devices, David Stearns would not bring this player back. Again, he believes in the profiles, and 31-year-old right-hand thrower, right-hand hitter, non-athlete, bad defender is not what he would get married to long-term, especially when he knows the shape of the rest of his team. Does Steve Cohen step in? Does the fan base screaming matter here? David Stearns was hired to make unemotional decisions. Does Cohen let him make an unemotional decision here? He could point out that Alex Rodriguez left the Mariners as a free agent, and the Mariners won 116 games the following year. Bryce Harper left the Nationals after 2018. The Nationals, without him, won the World Series in 2000.
And mind you, we all know the Nationals won that World Series in year one of Juan Soto, pretty much being the Bryce Harper replacement.
2019. Juan Soto left the Yankees last year and joined the Mets. The Yankees this year, I know they didn't get to the World Series, but if you watch them play, they won the same 94 games without Soto that they won with him. And it's a point to just point out, you could lose great players in their prime. All those players were better than Pete Alonso is now.
So there's a lot to dissect from this, honestly, and I'm glad that Joel brought this up to the degree that he did, because as someone who has pondered this exact kind of thing, to hear this from someone of Sherman's status is obviously of greater nature than myself, because while I, of course, pride myself on being a big talking head in this Mets space, and I certainly have every single one of you guys to thank for that, there's obviously a difference in playing field from someone like myself who's more of a fan than anything else versus someone like Joel Sherman who's been working side by side with these exact people in the industry in the know with the Mets organization, with the Yankees organization for a number of years. He's been doing this longer than I've been around, so that's saying a lot. So now let's start from the top here. Okay, basically without holding him anything back, without anyone getting in the way, David Stearns would not bring Pete Alonso back. Now, why would that be? As Joel already highlighted, a lot of it has to do with the type of profile of a player that Pete Alonso is. And a profile of a player that we know in the case of Pete Alonso is one that, not known for his defense, a subpar defender, actually the worst first baseman defensively in baseball this past year, and that paired with Mark Vientos being the worst third baseman defensively in baseball this past year when he had some limited reps there, was an absolute disaster for this Mets infield, and David Stearns saw it firsthand, absolutely helped derail the Mets season, especially with their road games. Alonzo knows a thing or two about botching plays on the road, right, Pete? But in all sincerity and in all seriousness here, Pete Alonso as a player profile is a fantastic slugger, top 5 in baseball. You can rightfully argue one of the best in the game still. And while he doesn't have the defense, he has the longevity. He's someone who's stayed healthy every single year. He gives you 162 for the most part, even as much as he throws his body out there. It doesn't hinder him from having the kind of success that he continues to have offensively. You know, another year where he's well above league average, 40% above league average. He sat right around 30% above league average as a hitter his entire career. There's a lot to like about Alonso when it comes to not only his ability to clutch up the way that maybe he didn't in the regular season of 2024, but he stepped up when it mattered most in postseason, the way he constantly did in ways for the Mets this past year offensively when a lot of other guys really weren't, especially in the first half. Alonso was carrying. He was an over 300 hitter for what felt like at least north of 2 months, and that was really impressive for a guy who you don't expect to be heading to high contact to the degree where he had a higher batting average this year than Francisco Lindor. I mean, that's very impressive for Alonso, who we know can be very feast or famine as a batter. But going back to the reasons as to why this would be the case with someone in David Stearns has not only to do with the defensive lack of value there, but also knowing just how someone like him ultimately, pardon me everybody, excuse me, has everything to do with the fact that this is someone who, even over the next 5 years, he's not going to profile any better at first base. He's only going to likely be more of a liability there. Pair that with someone who has been to this point rather stubborn on deviating away from first base to be more of what a position we could all agree he'd be best at, and that's designated hitter. You also look at the fact that Alonso is now going to be in a market that he has not been in prior, that being in one without a qualifying offer, which I've told you all since the start. As soon as that was going to be the case where Alonso did not have the QO attached in the way that he had last year, we are going to see a different market. I'm not saying the market's going to be overly drastic in difference from a year ago, but what I am saying is we're not going to see the same market where we watched every single team in real time at last free agency, one by one, domino by domino, fall after another for every single team that had a first base and or DH need. And that led us all the way till pretty much February or so of this year, where Scott Boras, David Stearns, Steve Cohen, and everyone else in company, Alonzo, all got together again. They hammered out the details and they said enough is enough. Alonso put his foot down and said, I'm going to be a 500 plus home run hitter. I'm going to be surefire Hall of Famer, and I'm going to do that regardless as to if I'm a New York Met or not. And him kind of putting that foot down with some, I'd imagine a level of moxie, a level, maybe not too much animosity, but rather a level of frustration with how the negotiations went and how maybe his perceived value of himself didn't become reality because of how the Mets hurt his market to a degree with the QO, because it absolutely did. Teams don't like to give up picks for guys that were still expected to get more shorter-term contracts regardless. Alonso seeking 7 years to begin last offseason was already his biggest problem, and this is the same Pete Alonso who, again, did this as someone who was planning to work with Scott Boras, denied a Mets 7-year contract extension a couple years ago. So it's not like the Mets haven't offered him the years, but it was, in fairness, more of a 4 or 5 year deal at the time because it was to buy out still the final, I believe, year or two of his previous contract, essentially. Just give him a higher AAV. So, again, not exactly how it looks when you get presented initially 7 years. So, okay, we understand David Stearns is someone who obviously wants guys not only defensive value, wants offensive value, wants guys who are going to be a clear fit here long-term. And I think we can all agree Alonzo does have a fit here long-term. I am one of those fans that I've been in this category for a while now after seeing another horrendous defensive year by Alonzo. And say what you will, maybe you think I give too much flack to Alonso's defense, that's okay. I went to bat for this man defensively many times in the past. So for me to come as much full circle to the point that I'm very anti that now, it's telling of just how much his defenses continue to regress. And it absolutely has, to the point that it has been a liability for this team. Now, has that liability outweighed his offensive production? Absolutely not. Not a chance in heck that's the case. However, it's something to be said for a team that's trying to be formatted in a way that Stearns has not yet had the opportunity to truly do so since becoming president, because a lot of these players have still been here in the organization. A lot of these players have still been here from before the David Stearns regime, and in doing so, he has to deal with the players that are still actively under contract that are not going to be, say, traded right away. And Alonso is still part of the old guard here from what Stearns is trying to build either with or around. And for the Steve Cohen aspect of this, I am overly intrigued because what Joel highlights is something I think is mightily important. David Stearns was brought in here as a New York Mets fan growing up from New York who always dreamed of being in this position. Steve Cohen saw him from the first year he became owner. He just didn't get a chance to hire him because he was still under contract in Milwaukee. Finally gets your man, supposed to be unbiased to the best of his abilities, supposed to have the emotions away to the best of his abilities, now while having a little bit of fan bias naturally. And we reach ourselves a massive problem. All those things are valid and make sense, but there's two key factors that separate the initial David Stearns mentality that Joel Sherman feels very confident in, that he would not bring Alonzo back and say a decent market where teams are pushing for Alonzo at a AAV north of 30 mil over, I'd imagine, 5+ years. I can see maybe to a degree the lack of appeal, but the immediate counter is one, who has the richest owner in baseball? Oh yeah, the New York Mets. And who has an owner that's royally pissed, pardon my French, the hell off after having his third losing season in his first 5 years, reaching year 5, which was supposed to be the year by the time the Mets would in theory win a championship, according to Steve's initial comments 5 years ago when he first became owner. To see the Mets continue to flounder and flail the way that they did, in as egregious of a fashion they did in 2025, by just being a really bad baseball team, injury-filled or not, they just had so many things inherently wrong with them in a lot of ways. Good things to a degree, but a lot of bad. And the bad outweighs the good here. That not only led a cleaning house of the coaching staff outside of Carlos Mendoza, but it also puts David Stearns on watch. And now if you're Steve Cohen, do you say to yourself, I need to get my hands a little dirty here. I need to get myself involved because I am not going to try to pitch this fan base that showed up at Citi Field more than any other time in franchise history was the case. The Mets' most attendance ever was in 2025, a year where they didn't even make postseason play. Steve Cohen had his post out publicly on X how much he appreciated the fans, how much of a failure this year was, and how he hopes to do right by them. Would he be doing right by this fan base by allowing Pete Alonso to walk to whatever team may be the highest bidder, even if that team might be a heavily competitive team still in the National League? Maybe they throw him ridiculous deferred money, or if, say, the Dodgers go crazy somehow. I'm not saying it has to make sense. I'm just saying in the sense of something that would not be good. He becomes a Bronx Bomber. He goes to the Philadelphia Phillies to replace Kyle Schwarber and is willing to be their DH type to platoon with Bryce Harper in the position between first and DH. Just imagine how terrible that would be from a Mets fan point of view. If that happened in the confines of David Stearns' stubbornness to not want to go to a certain amount of years for Alonzo, instead of Steve Cohen's lack of willingness to spend, I can only imagine how confident and comfortable Steve Cohen would be with trying to sell that to the fans for this upcoming season. Regardless of the fact that Juan Soto is the best player on this team, it's not Pete Alonso. Regardless of the fact that Francisco Lindor is deemed by many as more of the leader of this team in the ways that Alonso isn't. Say what you will about Alonso and the flaws that he has, but there is absolutely no denying the value that he's had both on and off the field since he made his debut for this club from Florida there as a second-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, all the way back in 2019. I personally was in attendance for Pete Alonso's first ever home run at Citi Field, and that's something that I take with great pride, knowing that Alonso is now the home run king of this organization. He's already a top 5 player, you could rightfully argue, in this organization's history because of exactly that. And for me, I'm just awfully curious to see how much does Steve Cohen get involved, maybe in similar fashion to last year, right? How much of a conservative approach did David Stearns have last offseason, which went in hand with Alonso's negotiations dragging as long as they did, versus Scott Boras being the stubborn Scott Boras and dragging things as much as he could because they weren't at all getting the contract that they were looking for of at least, say, 5-6 years, which ultimately led them back to the Mets on 2-3 years, but with an opt-out after every single season. So, from Steve Cohen's point of view, do you entrust David Stearns to do the job that you're paying him millions of dollars every year to do? Or do you evaluate and say to yourself, if David is not going to take Alonso as a serious priority, I need to? Because if that happens, then we reach ourselves a little bit of an Artie Moreno situation. As much as I mock the man, it would be fitting in the sense of overriding the people that you hired ultimately make the decisions for the organization based on your own personal bias and, say, stubbornness of your own. Even if it's what's best for the organization, it's still a bias and a stubbornness to a degree because you're overriding the people that you spend millions of dollars on yearly to make these exact decisions for you. So what is that compatibility like between David Stearns and Pete Alonso and how these negotiations go on? It would kill to be a fly on the wall because while I know plenty about how things go about front offices, how they operate. I know a lot of people in the industry, have connected with a lot of people in the industry. It's always fascinating to hear their opinions and also from their firsthand experiences. But it's still a very interesting thought with a lot of at stake this offseason for the Mets. A team going into another win now stage. And also for the first time now, year 3 under David Stearns, having a level of pressure on him after flopping this past year. You know, how does David Stearns respond? Because if you're Steve Cohen, and if you're the fan point of view, you probably say to yourself, how is Steven not going to go scorched earth this offseason, right? And why are we stubbornly going to care about years for Pete Alonso when he himself has made it a little bit more known that he's willing to do DH, just maybe not right away? Can the Mets bite the bullet and handle Alonso for a couple more years, and then he smoothly transitions to DH? I think they could do that. I don't think that's the end of the world. I think the Mets can handle Alonso's lack of defensive value at first base still because of how much his offense outweighs. I don't think that's wrong, inherently wrong. But I also see how that isn't necessarily fundamentally sound for how this team is trying to run under David Stearns. So we're kind of at a crossroads now because this is not the same off-season approach I believe the Mets would have had if they had a successful season. But they didn't. And they're far more comfortable and willing to bite the bullet, which is breaking up this core now more than ever before. Because what has this core brought to this Mets team? Nothing. It's brought some fun moments for sure, but we haven't gotten to the promised land. And as much as you can say the Dodgers will continue to be the massive factor as to why that is, the Dodgers are doing everything that they're allowed to do in the confines of baseball today. So it's up to Steve Cohen still. It's up to David Stearns to work with the rules that they have with them. Even with the 90+% tax beyond $300 million for anything that you spend on the dollar gets to the cheap owners in baseballs that decide not to spend. Even with that being the case, you have an obligation, Steve Cohen. And just like Edwin Diaz, who you simply cannot allow to walk, there's a real world where you should allow Edwin Diaz back on another north of 4-year contract around similar AAV that you shouldn't lose sleep over because you're Steve Mother effing Cohen. You should have that bulldog mentality. You should have that Wolf of Wall Street mentality just without all the bad stuff that comes along with it, even though that I understand in the case of Steven that stuff, that's a topic for another day, and that's separate from the channel in regards to how he's operated his hedge fund throughout his entire life. I'm not here to speak on that because I'm not overly informed, and I don't want to misspeak on anything that I don't properly know. What I do know is that Steve Cohen is a passionate, diehard Mets fan who bought this team, believe it or not, far more just because of what he's building around the stadium. Is it profitable with the inevitable casino they're putting in? And say the hotels, and say restaurants, bars, and entertainment? Absolutely. But Steve Cohen's continued to lose millions upon millions to billions since buying this organization. He's by no means doing this necessarily for a profit, as he's more than anything else doing this for the sake of being a passionate fan of wanting to give back to a fan base that he himself actually has the luxury to do so because he's filthy, stinking rich. That's the difference. Think of it in the manner of, you're watching this right now. You're a diehard Mets fan. Tomorrow, you just won the biggest lottery imaginable, and you just got thrown a net worth of $20 million. What would you do with a net worth of $20 million? I know what I would do. I would invest as much as possible in everything, from real estate to stock to you name it. I would buy numerous companies, and I would buy everything that I would view as a passion project. And what would be a passion project? Oh, it absolutely would be owning the New York Mets. No doubt about it. Not to run the New York Mets per se, because I feel like I would do more damage than good, but to own the New York Mets. And I'm sure that's not only something that he's worn with great pride, but as of late is wearing with slight embarrassment, because there's literally been nothing prideful or enjoyable about being a Mets fan all that much under Steve Cohen. There's been moments, like I said, there's been excitement, there's been things being intrigued by, but has there been anything overly, enticing for us to hang on for an extended period of time outside of the blockbuster signing of Juan Soto, the initial blockbuster trade of Francisco Lindor? Not a whole lot of great in between there. Let's be honest. The fact that our best moments under Cohen have been in offseason acquisitions kind of tells you all you need to know. And yes, we did have our moments in 2024, a fantastic ride, and that deserves credit in itself. But outside that, slim pickings for this team. And I can tell you as not only a fan, but as a content creator, I look at how the past 5 years have been doing everything under the Steve Cohen regime, covering every piece of news, rumor, signing, trade, game, you name it. And I can tell you firsthand, I've unfortunately dealt with more lows with things to hang your head on as a fan than things to be excited or enthralled by. And the one common consensus has been every single offseason is where we're making most headlines and having most excitement as a fan base. Yes, you have your moments for sure in the season. No doubt. No doubt about it. But there's something different when you make a signing like Juan Soto. There's something different when you get the breaking news from Jeff Passan that Francisco Lindor is being traded to the New York Mets. There's a different aura and feel to that. And you have to wonder, is Steve Cohen going to have a trick up his sleeve or multiple this offseason where he goes scorched earth in ways that we just, again, really can't seem to fathom right now, because there's a lot the Mets can do. They have so many assets to work with from their farm up. They're in a more prime position to make blockbuster trades than ever before. And they're in a more prime and understanding position by the fan base to mix up this team as much as they possibly could and get away with it. This is the counter to the Steve Cohen overriding David Stearns. And that is the following. David Stearns was brought in to build this roster, build this team, and run ship for a while. This is now the time for David Stearns to show his worth, to flex his guns after faltering in so many ways this past year. The only way to earn back the trust of the fan base is to go out and prove it. And has Stearns deviate away from that Joel Sherman mentality that we talked about earlier? Does Stearns understand that Steve is willing to spend whatever it takes for Alonzo, knowing that Alonzo will transition to DH within the next couple of years? So is that enough for David to be sold and saying, okay, then we'll do everything in our power to bring him back? I'd like to think that's the case. But again, I understand the level of fans and criticism that may believe otherwise, that Stearns could be quote-unquote stingy Stearns, and so proven otherwise. All I'm here to say from a fan point of view is that if Pete Alonso is not a New York Met next season, and the factor is like a year or so difference on the contract, I will crash out. I will lose my mind. Because unless the Mets make the proper replacements in those areas, both offensively and defensively, we have ourselves a massive problem for a homegrown talent who wants to be here. And I'm going to be frank. From what I've heard in the industry at this point in this offseason, I've heard more skepticism on the Mets bringing Alonzo back than it is Alonzo not wanting to return, which would coincide with Sherman's comments earlier today, which is if David Stearns didn't have Steve Cohen or anyone in the way, he would allow Alonzo to walk. Is that going to hold true? Only time will tell. And I promise you, everybody, regarding these negotiations, all the highs, the lows, and every little detail that happens in between of it, we will break down the platform all off season long. Thank you guys again for watching. I really do appreciate it. Let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below to Sherman's comments today. Do you believe that David Stearns is under that kind of mentality, that he does not want Alonzo to return? Or do you think that's a little bit more of a soundbite than it is anything else, and that Stearns will do whatever it takes to bring back the polar bear for the foreseeable future because he deserves it as the home run king here in Flushing, Queens? Whatever your thoughts are, drop them down below. Thank you again so much for watching. And as always, no matter what, Mets fans, no matter what, let's go Mets. Peace out, everybody.